Hi there, my name's Sarah,
And I'm Rose.
and we're just going to take the next few minutes to walk you through some of the backstage ins and outs behind the Responsible Raw Materials Conference that we hosted about 2 weeks ago now. So firstly, we're going to talk about the planning of the conference, then we're going to talk about what happened immediately before the conference, then the conference itself, and then finally what happened immediately after the conference. So to start with, Rose, what were some of our hints and tips behind the planning of the conference itself?
So I think first and foremost, it's to get an idea in your own head of what you want and then run that past other channels before you start anything else. So we knew who we wanted and ran it by different people and got their input straight away. And once we had that, getting a website ready that we could play with and starting to form it and get an online presence really kick-started the process, I think.
So I guess with that, what we're talking about was we knew that we wanted to talk about how do you make raw materials more responsible. We had an idea for some different session themes, etc., but we didn't know if they were right. And so we went to some key influencers or different channels and asked them if they thought it was a good idea, and also for ideas on who they thought would be good to speak. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we collected all of those in and we began to put together a website. So the website was really our communication tool. Now, once we'd started to pull in people who were interested in speaking, what did we do then?
Well, after we invited them, in the invite, we sent out the template with the abstract and the biography. And I think that makes it clear to everybody what's expected of them and what we want from them, rather than just asking them generally. But we were pretty flexible with that as well. And the way that we decided to do the abstract changed ourselves as we went throughout the two, as well as the sessions.
Yeah, so this was something that was actually made it quite easy, wasn't it? Because we only gave ourselves a 2-week window to organise the entire thing. So things were moving really rapidly. But yeah, by giving people just a Word template for their abstract and biography, gave them something to shoot at. But we also made it clear that if they already had material, just to throw it at us anyway, and we could use that because we just wanted to reduce the burden on them. I think was our intent, wasn't it?
That's the intent.
Now we also decided that obviously it was going to be a free conference, so nobody was going to be paid. Obviously there were no travel expenses, but we did have some sponsors who came in and they very kindly donated money to cover things like the Zoom license, etc., like that. And we also decided to set up a donations page so that any proceed would go straight to charity. How did we decide to do that, and how did we go about doing that?
So I think it's important to decide who your charities are and work out why. So ours were based on COVID and responsibility, so that fit quite nicely with the conference. Then spoke to them and made sure they were all on the Virgin Giving page. So Virgin Giving allow you to have 5 charities as opposed to other platforms only allow you to have 1, and you can add others at later dates. So it just means that you can be a little bit more flexible, as some charities say yes and get involved and you're still waiting on others. And I think going through a platform makes it far more transparent for other people and makes it easier and better for them to be able to donate.
Yeah, so that was something there where it was the transparency that we were really keen on for many reasons, obviously. That did constrain the number of charities that we could consider, though, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It made it tricky at times. But some charities were happy to get into contact with us and discuss maybe setting up a page. I think it's quite easy for charities to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if they're not willing to, then maybe that's a different conversation.
So I think that the final thing then, before we go on to immediately before the conference, was when we were setting up the kind of almost the flow of the conference itself, we didn't know how many sessions we'd have. We didn't really know which days of the week we would be running them on. We didn't know what times of day we'd be running it. We just had a vague concept that we would have an early morning session and a late afternoon session UK time, so that people from Australia and also people from the Americas would be able to engage on a live basis with the conference. But one thing we did stick with was that everybody would be given a time slot that was only 10 minutes for talking and then 10 minutes for questions, which for some people, that's very common. For other conferences, that's quite uncommon, and the time slot was quite short. Do you think, in retrospect, we did it right, Rose, or do you think we gave people too short a time period in which to be able to air their thoughts?
No, I think 10 minutes is right. The whole idea of it was meant to be quite conversational. Being an online conference, you can't just grab someone and go for a coffee. So I think having time for a conversation afterwards and time for an open conversation with different channels is quite important. So I think even if you were to extend the talk time, then that shouldn't eat into the conversation time afterwards. And personally, I like 10-minute presentations because it keeps it concise, although that's not the norm for other conferences.
Yeah, I think it's something as well where 10 minutes works really well online because somebody is watching the television in a way. And so you need people's attention spans are perhaps shorter than they would be if you were in a face-to-face forum. So that was another impetus, I think, as well, to make it nice and short. And the other thing was that people often signposted different references, that because you're watching online, you could actually go and look at them in parallel with listening to the live talk or watch the recording afterwards. So it was almost like this mixed media approach that you could tap into that in a normal face-to-face conference, you can't do that on a live basis. So that was the planning stage. Then we went into immediately before the conference. So during that 2-week period, obviously we pulled together the 5 days worth of the 65 different talks given by 71 people, or however many it was at the end of the day. So we'd set up the schedule. And I think that was something where we've been using live forms on Teams so that those of us who are organising the conference could constantly see what the up-to-date agenda looked like, and we could send that out for feedback on a regular basis. Is there anything we should mention just in terms of that stage of organisation and the dynamic nature of it, Rose?
I think it's important that all the planning goes in a document that everybody has access to, because it adds accountability and means that everyone knows what's going on if somebody's not replying to an email or something. I also think that keeping it to just the people who need access to it's quite important, because you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen editing different things at the same time. So I think having a smaller number of people who can access everything works really well in this.
Yeah, and as well, regular check-in times with one another as well, so that on a day-to-day basis, you could see how things were evolving and where problems were cropping up. And it was actually during that many of the ideas for actually running the conference itself emerged, because there were things that we only thought of as we were going through that planning stage. And one of the things that we thought of during that stage was the speakers knew what it was that they had to do. They knew when it was that they were speaking. Rose had put together fantastic written instructions with regards to what they might need to expect. Many of them had actually sent their presentations in advance so that we had a backup of them if the speaker was unable to share their screen, etc. But we also decided to make them a little video, a bit like this, so that they could almost experience what was it going to be like when they ran their conference or ran their session within the conference. And those videos went down really well, didn't they, Rose?
I think it's nice to be able to see what should be pressed and how to do it. I think if somebody's not very confident in using the tech, written instructions maybe aren't quite enough.
Yeah, so it was they could read the instructions, they could then watch the instructions, and then we also offered people practice sessions as well. So if there was anybody who was really nervous about it, then we could set up ad hoc sessions with them just to calm them down. And this was a case where we know that lots of other conferences, they do pre-record some sessions to make sure that absolutely nothing could go wrong. And actually we didn't have the opportunity to do that because we ended up with way too many hours worth of content, and we were just going to have to go for it. So another thing as well in terms of that immediately before the conference stage was we obviously used Zoom in its webinar format for the conference itself, but we decided that we were going to stream live to YouTube, which Zoom makes incredibly easy to do. And that was something that we practiced only really a few days before. And there were some things that we learned through that experience, weren't there? So what happened, Rose?
So I don't think we realised at the time that streaming live to YouTube, it automatically saves the video to YouTube and allows people to comment on it. It wasn't a video that we were aware that would be able to happen to. So we got a bit of a fan base straight away.
Yes, so hello there to all of our fans who enjoyed seeing Rose and I practice with streaming live to YouTube. We love you too, thank you. So that was a case there where I think just by playing with the technology, it meant that we felt quite at home in terms of using it when it then came to doing the live conference. But we also had backup plans because of course there've been lots of news in the media with regards to Zoom not perhaps working or being as secure as people might like, etc. So that was a case where whilst we hadn't actually told anybody what the backup plan was, our backup plan was we had WebEx ready to go if we needed to change the platform. Now, obviously that would have destroyed our streaming live to YouTube link, etc. But it still meant that we had a mechanism through which we could run the conference if we needed to move away from Zoom. Were there any other backup or contingency plans that we had there, Rose?
I think we considered multiple other platforms, and this is where the website's helpful as well. So we had a live conference page on there which had instructions which we could have changed over to WebEx. So even people watching on YouTube could have gained access. And then we'd have sent out the emails to everybody. So having all the delegate information on hand with clear instructions ready to send out in that instance, I think, yeah.
No, that meant that we were ready to go. And also because what we found was as soon as the conference started and word got out, people kept signing up. And we'd made the decision, rather than having an automated sign-up process, actually we wanted to be able to do our own checks on everybody who was signing up, just to make sure that there weren't any cyber risks, for example, coming to fruition there. And so that meant that actually having everything ready to go was really good, because it meant it was easy for you to send out all the joining instructions on the fly.
So many emails.
Is there anything that we could improve for the future on that though, Rose? Would an automated system have helped?
I think potentially it would have helped, but it also meant that we had up-to-date information about how many people were joining. It meant we had a good grasp of who was there as well. So when you can see the email addresses, you know what countries people are in, and then it does allow you to perhaps tailor the conversation that way, or at least know who your audience is, which a lot of speakers were quite interested in. So they'd, behind the scenes, were asking, you know, are people going to know about EU regulations, or are they global? And it means that you have more of a grasp on that, I think, by doing it bit by bit.
Yeah, so I guess it made it more personal, and it helped to also develop that trust and that respect within the community, which you don't get with an automated invite, whereas you do if it's Rose that's actually sending you the email type thing, whilst the conference is going on as well. So I think that was great. I think one of the final things that we did prior to the conference was we did do a practice session with some of our broader colleagues as a whole, and just asked them to try and break the system. And that was really good, because not only did it test the system and help us practice, but it meant that we had a whole series of backup hosts as well, so that if our internet failed, etc., or if one of us got ill, then somebody else would be able to step into our shoes and just keep the conference going. Is there anything else we should share just about that practice session, Rose?
No, I don't. It definitely helped, and it should definitely be done, especially if you're using different types of Zoom. So we hadn't used the webinar function before, and playing meant that we worked things out, like different attendees have very different views that we maybe wouldn't have realised in terms of the questions and the chat and the functionality. And I think it's important to know what everybody can see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can have that empathy and put yourself in their shoes. And that was key, because I think when it then came to the conference itself, and somebody would send us a message saying, why can't anybody see me? Well, we knew that actually no attendees, that the videos were disabled automatically. So it was a case of, no, that's fine, don't worry, it's just part of the system and things like that. So we could understand what they were experiencing because we'd experienced it, which was key. Cool. So coming on to the conference itself, and so that was a case where each of our session blocks were 3 hours in length. Obviously, everybody had their 10 minutes talk and 10 minutes a question, or a 20-minute time slot in its entirety. Before each session started, we invited our speakers, if they wanted to come online half an hour before so that they could test their slides and they could test their audio and all of that kind of stuff. And probably, 50% of speakers maybe took us up on that offer?
Yeah, probably around that.
Whilst the others either felt comfortable because they'd watched the video, or perhaps they just didn't have time, which again was totally okay. And so what that meant was we usually had about 50% of our speakers already logged in, ready to go as a panel before we went for that session. Whereas for everybody else, when they logged in, they would automatically come in as an attendee, and then Rose would upgrade them to being a panelist. And during that particular process, Rose, you'd usually check in and make sure they were okay and they were feeling confident. Is that right?
Yeah, make sure that we knew their presentation style. So are they using slides, or are they just going to be a talking head like this? If their slides, are they comfortable sharing them? Quickly go over the instructions on how to share your screen if people aren't sure, and checking that if the internet connection isn't too great, that we have a copy of the slides as well. And the fact that on Zoom you can have private chats like that only between panelists. So once they're at a panelist, you can do that. That's a really nice function and definitely helpful in terms of knowing in the background what's going on.
And that was something which was really key for me as well. So obviously I was hosting the conference and trying to keep everything going along from that sort of visual end. But because you were having those conversations with everyone behind the scene, if there was a problem coming, as it were, you could give me the heads up. So it just meant that I might need to do some more filling of space while somebody got their slides working or something like that, which was fantastic. And so I think in terms of that, actually, in terms of that division of roles between the two of us during the conference, that was absolutely vital, wasn't it? So that we both knew exactly what one another were doing, but also we had our set roles and responsibilities for keeping an eye on different channels.
Absolutely, and knowing how you're going to communicate with each other as well. So we had WhatsApp open in the background so that we knew what was going on, and we were in constant communication so that if anything was about to happen or potentially about to happen, we knew what was going on. We had plans for it.
Yeah, so that was a case where we had WhatsApp open, which was just for the two of us. And so actually there was no private communication really between the two of us on the Zoom chat. I think we did all of our private conversation on WhatsApp, which also then put in a safety in case we were talking about perhaps a speaker who was having problems. That might be quite embarrassing if we inadvertently said that in the open forum on Zoom. So actually that was something that we kept very quiet on WhatsApp between the two of us as well. And if you look at any of the videos, you'll see where Rose has alerted me to something that's going on and I start laughing. Usually those things have gone on through WhatsApp behind the scenes. And actually speaking to that, usually there were, because we had so many different flows of information. So we had everything coming in through chat on Zoom, through the Q&A on Zoom. Then we also had YouTube, and of course we had all the comments that were going on YouTube, which were brilliant. It's some really interesting discussion that was going on there. But then we also had things like Twitter, and we had people emailing us as well, together with other people WhatsApping us on different streams, etc. So it was this all kinds of different flows of information coming at us at any one point in time whilst trying to keep this live show on the road. But Rose, that was a case where you were keeping a close eye on things like YouTube. If you could tell that I hadn't seen some of the chats coming through, you were giving me a heads up on that, weren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it meant that we could engage them in questions. So if there was something coming through that I thought was particularly important that perhaps Sarah might have missed whilst doing a Q&A, it just meant that I could point that out as well and make sure that everything was up to date.
Yeah.
I think that comes into clear roles again though.
Yeah, no, and that was absolutely brilliant. And I think the other thing as well that we had was we had some fantastic volunteers who were helping us sort of on the side. So, for example, for every session, Rose, you'd managed to corral everybody into everybody had. So we had a volunteer for every session to write a kind of a summary blog, which they published under their own names on LinkedIn, etc. So it was their perspective of what was going on, but we then used that as the summary post for that day's worth or that session's worth of the conference, and that took quite a big load off us because we knew that somebody else was actually capturing all of the salient points for that particular session. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I think having somebody like that not only takes the emphasis off us having to have picked up every point that got brought up, it also meant that we had someone ready who naturally was taking notes of the talks, so that if we needed a panel session, somebody who could potentially answer questions or ask questions or discuss what they thought was particularly important. And it also meant we had somebody as a panelist who wasn't expected to present, who had your internet fell down and I'd have to have taken your role, they could have then taken mine. And having that person there was just another safety blanket, filling a couple of roles so that people aren't there needlessly, but kind of allowed an extra level of safety.
Yeah, no, they were absolutely fantastic. So thank you again to all of our wonderful volunteers who wrote those fantastic blogs. It was great. And so you mentioned there, so in case somebody's internet fell over, etc. So that was also something that kind of fell into the I guess the structure of the sessions, because the structure was so simple. It was just 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes times 3, basically. Mm-hmm. And there were, whilst not one speaker didn't turn up, which is quite remarkable. Some people cut it pretty fine. But what the plan of action there was that if somebody didn't turn up or couldn't log in for whatever reason, or somebody's internet died, then the default was that we would go straight into a panel session. So that the other speakers who were, and there was no, it wasn't mandatory, but they were invited to stick around if they wanted to, they stayed in the panel session. And so it meant that if somebody didn't turn up, then we would just go into a 20-minute panel session. And the discussion was so rich and so interesting, that was really, really easy to do. And so I always had a list of questions off to one side that if someone didn't pitch up, I knew exactly who I was going to. And that was a case where constantly, again, on the private chat amongst the panelists, we were constantly keeping them updated with regards to just a heads up. Our next speaker still hasn't arrived and it's only 5 minutes until he or she needs to speak. So therefore, we may well be going into a panel session. If you'd like to be a part of it, please turn your videos on now. So it was just keeping things very, very simple and open amongst us, and that worked really nicely. The other thing as well was that for some talks, we were inundated on questions. For other talks, there was nothing. And so that was a case there where obviously I was very interested in the talks, so that was easy to ask questions, but also we could send out the requests to our other panelists to say, well, what do you guys reckon? And so they were really, really great at posting questions. And sometimes what we did was we actually invited them to pose the questions themselves. The final thing, I think, with regards to those questions, and this is where having both Rose and myself doing this as a double act, was if we had one particular individual who was really good at emailing in his thoughts. And so actually we had a conversation going on with him in the background saying, hey, can we actually read out your email and use that to help summarize this particular session, or at least start the discussion that we wanted. And so that was a really good way of engaging with somebody who couldn't join the panel for various reasons, but still felt very much a part of the conference as a whole. Is there anything we should say more about that, Rose?
I don't think so, other than to emphasise that allowing all these different ways into the conference and being so flexible works really nicely. I think sometimes it's quite tempting to only allow questions in the Zoom chat because it's easy to keep track of. But actually allowing people to get in contact in all the different ways and having all the different ways open, it means that you interact with people that you definitely wouldn't otherwise. So we had a little group who were interested on YouTube that we would never have engaged with had we not been streaming to YouTube. And it was really interesting allowing that into the conference, allowing things like the emails, because that was a really great email, and really that panel session was fantastic. And I think it's important to allow that openness, actually, and it made a lot of people feel like they'd been part of a real conference as opposed to just a webinar.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think that was a case of being open, allowing whatever channel people wanted to engage with us, you know, that was there, and we would attempt to actually make that work, and also being really flexible. And so, for example, making the decision, do we reply to people on YouTube, or do we just stay distant? And we can make that decision on the fly. And I think that then takes us into maybe the final comment with regards to actually running the conference. So when things are live, when things are real, you can't prep for everything. And so this was a case where if you're the person who is actively hosting, so if you're the visual host, you need to be prepared to talk someone through how to share their slides. So we had this on a number of occasions where, for whatever reason, somebody's technology wasn't quite working. And I think we've all sat through conferences or webinars where there's that really painful moment where there's just silence and all you can see is someone desperately trying to find share screen or work out whatever it is they're doing, and then you see their desktop with all of their emails and all of this kind of stuff. So that was a case there where it was our job to actually make the presenters and the speakers feel at ease and as relaxed as possible. And if things were going wrong, it was a case where we could actually jump in with a bit of conversation and say, no, well, don't worry, whilst speaker X is uploading his or her slides, we're just really excited to hear that most recent discussion, etc., etc. So you actually filled the space whilst the technology was going wrong. Now, during those moments, that was usually me speaking, and Rose was usually there, busy away in the background, desperately trying to help the person get the slides online. Where that wasn't working, then I would usually talk people through where the right buttons usually might be, and that generally sped the process up a little bit, and also kept things going for the number of people that we had listening in. The final thing on that is just in terms of facilitation style. So if you were doing a face-to-face conference, you would generally look and direct your body language towards the next person who's going to come up onto the stage, and you probably gesture to them to say, right, now is your moment, you might want to come and stand up here, you're ready. Whereas of course you can't do that when you're on a webinar or some sort of VC. Instead, what you can do, obviously you can send them messages behind the scenes. Sometimes that doesn't work. Some people don't have chat open. And so instead you've got to use verbal cues. So for example, Rose, I'm going to come to you in a second, just to maybe talk about some of the facilitation style and what works, what doesn't work so well. So as I'm saying all of this, I can see that Rose is unmuting her mic, etc. So all of these are cues. So every time I said, now is your chance to unmute your mic, the reason why I'm saying it is because I can see that they haven't unmuted their mic yet, and they might want to do that. And so it just made things flow a bit more smoothly from that verbal facilitation. It sounds like I never wanted to shut up. Most of it was just filler to try and make it a bit easier on the speakers. Is that how it came across, Rose, or did it just sound like I like the sound of my own voice?
No, I think it shows that everyone knows what's going on. It alerts people. It makes it more comfortable when you're the person as well desperately trying to find the unmute button if you're talking, rather than that horrible static silence. And I think that's a really nice way of doing it, actually. It works very well. So I think whoever's presenting needs to be aware of these different things that they might need to fill on, and fully understand the software that they're using so that they can direct people about.
Yeah, so that was something as well where the backup moment that was really useful, and I think we used it once, which was where someone had actually sent their slides to us in advance and they just couldn't share their slides their end. And so there was a moment where we just said, it's okay, don't worry, Rose will now share the slides from our end, which sparked mild panic on our side of things, because I think as well that was my fault. I would share the slides, and of course I totally forgot, and I dumped that on poor Rose. But that then meant that actually Rose knew exactly where to go and find the slides. It was faster to share them that way. And what we said, I think, was, whilst the slides are coming up, why don't you just start your presentation now? And so it just meant it's much smoother transition. So in summary, what happened after the conference? So we'd always built the website in mind so that it could be reconfigured to embed all of the individual videos within the abstracts. What else had we done, Rose?
Well, it was a work in progress, actually, and it still is. So it's very much as ideas come through, and this goes back to flexibility, actually. Taking on advice and letting the conference go where it naturally does, we ended up reconfiguring so originally we were going to split the website into producers, consumers, investors, and we decided that wasn't really appropriate. So we were editing the videos as we went along, so we had a fantastic helper doing that, so they were ready to go onto YouTube straight away. We knew the workflow for that as well, who was going to upload the videos, who was going to then make them public and reformat them. And then we reformatted that as well. So originally the abstracts you could go through them based on the different sessions, but once the sessions was over, that became a little bit redundant. So instead we did it by categories. So we made a matrix of all the themes that actually came through in the talks that wouldn't have been so clear perhaps by their title. But having listened to them, we could put them into the different categories. And then we also added learning materials as well. So all those links that got sent through, or the websites that people got signposted to throughout the different talks, we were making a list throughout the conference, and then uploaded those to the website as we went along as well, so that they're available after the fact.
Yeah, and this was something where possible, we added things on almost on a live basis. Yeah. And then, of course, things got behind a little bit during the conference, but they were still all up within a week. So whilst, as you say, the website is still being configured, as it were, and things are still changing, and probably will continue to change as we continue to get more talks coming in. And they will continue to come in onto that resource, because it was a case where this wasn't just about the conference, it was actually about the legacy after the conference and the resource that we wanted to create, having run a conference and being able to record everybody's fabulous talks. And I think with that, so with regards to the website, we intentionally just used Wix. So we used a very, very simple, easy to use template that actually both of us could be in there editing things at the same time. And updating it as we went. And as Rose said, that was also our backup plan for if Zoom crashed, we could immediately publish, well, what are the new details on the website, send out an email to all of the appropriate people at that moment in time. So it meant that the website was very much live and constantly being updated. It wasn't a static page, which it so often is for a conference as a whole. Now, we also sent out emails to all of our speakers immediately afterwards as well, didn't we, Rose?
Yeah, just to confirm that people were happy with their videos going online. So some people didn't want the videos going up for various reasons, or they weren't comfortable with the question section. Some people, and this is perfectly fine too, some people want the video to be more of a company thing. So they perhaps want different bits out of it, that either data that can't be shared or shouldn't be shared, or doesn't align with various things, and that allows that flexibility as well. So emailing people straight away and asking people to reply quickly as well, I think keeps communication going, and also allows you to make any last minute changes, because we've changed a few of the abstracts since as well, because people's talks changed as the week went on, things like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think this was something here where, because we weren't constrained by the more traditional way of doing a conference, where you had maybe a conference brochure in print, where if you need to change it, you're slotting in pages or something like that, because it was all electronic. And because we were constantly in communication with everybody, we could change things up as we went. And in fact, during the conference, we did things like word clouds for what is another word for a stakeholder. And we launched a competition on the Thursday night of just draw a picture of what you think a mine looks like. None of that was planned. It was all ad hoc and on the fly, but I think certainly added to the conference as a whole. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, just in summary, so the Responsible Raw Materials Conference was held in the middle of May 2020. It took us 2 weeks to put it together, and that was from the seed of an idea through to actually welcoming people to this live conference. We ran sessions all the way through the week, and so we ended up with 8 sessions as a whole, which incorporated approximately 65 individual talks, all of which were absolutely fabulous. And as you can see, we learned an awful lot during it. I think we were lucky that nothing major didn't go wrong, but we did have backup plans for where things might catch us if things had gone wrong as a whole. Yes, we are doing more conferences. So if anybody would like to hear anything more about this or ask any questions about what not to do or where things went right, we will certainly be glad to help you with that. Rose, any final thoughts or comments from yourself?
I think it was a really good exercise in being flexible. And I think if you're going to arrange anything like this, the nature of being online means who knows what's going to happen. And being open and willing to just go with it was absolutely the key to this.
Brilliant. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Bye.